Chapter 33. The next day, I received quite unpleasant news. My mother fell ill again with a sharp, horrible pain in her back. She had been really nervous lately because she, as a good specialist, had been simply overloaded with work. Moreover, she had to finish the work that had piled up during her absence, and they also had a planned inspection in their office. So, due to such sedentary diligence as well as her natural honesty and conscientiousness, her back along with her nerves couldn't withstand such an overload. That day she got up from bed with great difficulty, with horrible, unbearable pain in the small of her back. This was certainly a shock for my dad and myself. We were terribly worried. Each of us tried to help her in our own way. My father started to call all his acquaintances to consult about other methods of treatment because my mother emphatically didn't want to undergo surgery. Most likely, she was scared not by the surgery itself, but by the consequences she had seen and heard from many people while in the neurology ward. My mother didn't at all like the prospect of becoming disabled for the rest of her life, but at one point the pain became so strong that she agreed to do anything. Meanwhile, my father was already calling his immediate superior, the general, to obtain leave for the following day. My dad had said that this general was a good man. With fatherly concern, he took care of and worried about all his subordinates and always helped them and their families as much as he could. This time, he didn't betray his principles either, and didn't ditch his second in command. After listening to my father, the general recommended a good chiropractor and gave him the corresponding address. He also told my father to reassure my mom, because he had a similar story from when he had pulled a muscle in his leg. After receiving treatment from that chiropractor, he had been up and running for 2 years now, and so far everything was fine. After the call, my mom and dad unanimously decided to go there the next day. As for me, honestly speaking, I was doubtful. My consciousness couldn't grasp how my mother could be treated with bare hands alone, if even injections and pills didn't help her. I decided to treat my mom in my own way, as Sensei had described. He actually told me that any person can make a matrix of health with the power of his deep inner love, if he believes in it very much. Before going to bed after all my meditations, I focused on an image of health for my mother. I imagined her completely healthy, happy and cheerful, with her beautiful, sweet smile and kind eyes. I silently asked forgiveness from God for all my sins if I had such in his opinion. I sincerely asked him to help her because I love my mom very much. I was begging so zealously that I even shed a few tears. I wanted so much for my mom to recover as soon as possible, that after this kind of peculiar meditation, I ran to my parents' room to see if maybe something had already changed. My father was working on some papers at his writing desk while my mother was already asleep. Her face was frowning slightly. Her back was probably aching even in sleep. I returned to my room and thought, maybe my power alone is not enough. Of course, I will continue doing this technique to create a matrix of health, but it would be great if Sensei would join in. Then success would be guaranteed for sure. He has such spiritual power, such solid inner faith, and such knowledge that he can probably do anything if he was able to save me from death just with the power of his thought. I should speak with him at the next training session. He is nice. He'll help us. With these good thoughts, I fell asleep. The next day, I accompanied my mother to the chiropractor. The general kindly provided his black Volga car to us, as well as his personal driver who knew the area and the roads quite well. On the way, I imagined how this decrepit old chiropractor, as I imagined him, having examined my mother, would tell her that everything is fine with her, that this is a mistake, and she is healthy. Meanwhile, I noticed that the driver turned towards the district where we attended spiritual meditations. Familiar places, I grinned to myself. It's strange that such a remote district is so famous for its people. I again focused on the desired result. We arrived at a residential neighborhood. I spotted the house where the chiropractor evidently received patients from afar. Or rather, I didn't see the house itself, but a huge crowd of people who were standing near a small but tidy dwelling. There were a lot of people there, The driver barely managed to park his car among numerous cars there, his professional attention drawn to the fact that, based on their license plates, many cars were not only from different regions but even from different republics. I was somewhat surprised that this godforsaken place was so famous. People were standing in line as if forming a solid wall. It didn't even help that we arrived in a black Volga. No matter how we tried to break through the crowd, we weren't able to. We had to stand in the queue like everyone else. My mother, meanwhile, was reclining in the car. Our number in the queue was 473. However, when people found out that my mother had an acute pain, we were told that the chiropractor received those in pain out of turn, and that we had to stand in a different queue which was ahead. We hurried to join the others in the out-of-turn queue, where there were about 50 people. Those who could at least stand on their feet even gave my mother a seat on the bench, and so we waited. I was extremely surprised by the number of people, and even got a little flustered. People in the queue were of various ages, from seniors to young people with children. Ahead, there stood a woman with a tiny baby. They said he was only 5 days old and already had plexitis. He couldn't raise his hand due to some kind of labor pathology. All in all, the public that gathered there had various spinal diseases that I had never even heard of before. An elderly woman who was sitting next to my mother said that the chiropractor received 20 women, 20 men, and then 10 people from the out-of-turn queue. She said that the queue wasn't actually very long. According to her estimate, we would be received within 2 hours. I thought that in such a situation I had time to focus on healing meditation for my mother. For about 10 minutes, I tried hard to do it. But it wasn't easy to concentrate because the crowd was quietly buzzing in incessant conversation, creating unobtrusive noise interference. I unwittingly began to listen to the conversations. "We had such misfortune and so much grief," lamented an old woman standing next to a girl of about 15 years old. "It's horrible even to recall. There is nothing worse in the world than to have a sick child. My granddaughter had a horrible kyphoscoliosis, a real hump. Doctors predicted that she would be disabled for her entire life. The girl came back from school in tears every day. Though she has a beautiful face, her classmates teased her, calling her a freak. We went everywhere, took her to many doctors, even to psychics, but it was all in vain. We were in total despair. And once, we barely made it in time. God helped us to pull the girl out of a noose, so to say. She was in tears, asking why would she need such a life if nobody would ever love her. She was crying. We were crying. Words cannot convey such grief. The woman's voice trembled as she furtively wiped away a tear. "Don't cry, Grandma," pleaded her granddaughter. "Everything's fine now." Right. So that day I went to church and prayed to God, and the next morning we received a fresh newspaper with an article about our chiropractor. Naturally, we doubted at first whether we should go and entrust our child to yet another doctor because she had already been examined by many specialists. But, given the latest events, in the end, we decided that if God was giving us another chance, we shouldn't refuse since it couldn't get any worse. We were nervous upon arriving here, but people in the queue spoke well of the chiropractor. And when we entered and I saw his eyes, all doubts dissolved for some reason. He has such luminous blue eyes, such a kind and appeasing gaze that my heart really eased. "Yes," said another woman. "His eyes are really unusual, so fathomless, as if they know everything, as if he feels your pain." "I've never seen such peaceful and intelligent eyes in my life either," uttered a young woman who was standing next to her. The women nodded their heads in agreement. "And he has such a pleasant, melodic voice and a calming manner of speaking. He talks so politely to everyone. When I speak with him, my mood always gets better. It makes me want to live even after all the pain I endured. I have such a feeling, too. That's what it means to be a good man." When I was listening to these words, my heart missed a beat. I halted all my fruitless attempts to concentrate and began to listen to the conversation more intently. "That's what I'm saying," uttered the old woman. Something in him was quite unusual and encouraging. He examined the girl and said that he would fix her spine, but we would have to come here regularly and follow all his recommendations at home. You cannot imagine how his inspiring words affected the girl. We attended treatment sessions for a long time, almost a year, even though we live in another region. Sometimes there was bad weather and it was hard to come, but Anna always insisted on the trip. She developed such a sense of purpose that we just rejoiced and thanked God. At home, she diligently performed the entire daily complex of therapeutic gymnastics recommended by the chiropractor. And in a year, there wasn't a trace left of her hump. You can't imagine how happy we were. Anna blossomed. So many suitors appeared right away. They are chasing after her in droves. Now we are here for a checkup. Oh, we pray to God to give him good health. His hands of gold have simply worked a miracle. Yes, he definitely has hands of gold, confirmed another woman about 40 years old. He's a professional in the full sense of the word. You can rarely find such a specialist who possesses a talent from God and this kind of comprehensive knowledge of medicine. As for me, I suffered from headaches for 10 years. I was treated in several elite clinics, but with no result. I had sleepless nights and headaches to the point of a loss of consciousness. And 2 years ago, I'm even afraid to recall those days, I stopped walking. You wouldn't wish this experience on your enemy, this state of confusion and helplessness, and such a strong pain in the small of the back and legs. Again, sleepless nights, injections, but no result. There were even horrible minutes of despair from pain and suffering, even though by nature I'm a strong woman and have always been a leader. Unexpectedly, my entire life stopped, everything froze, and I was left with just pain and suffering. Of course, doctors were insisting on surgery and tried to convince me that nothing but surgical intervention would help me. However, they couldn't guarantee full recovery. In a word, they predicted lifelong disability for me. But then my mother came over and told me about our chiropractor, persuading me to go and visit him. I consulted with my doctors, but they just laughed in my face and said that nobody in the world, even among prominent physicians, had ever cured a herniated disc, especially on the neck, in a non-surgical way. They said, "Go visit him if you want to, but you're going to come back to us." Yet, my mother insisted. When I was brought here, I didn't have any hope after such a verdict from the doctors. However, surprisingly enough, after the first 7 visits, one of my toes started moving, and the pain abated a little. That's when I really began to believe in recovery, although on the very first day the chiropractor said, "It will be hard and will take a long time, but we'll fix it." With every day, I started noticing small but steady changes for the better. Little by little, I began to move and dress myself without anyone's assistance. In half a year, I returned to normal life, and now I'm finishing up treatment. I cannot believe that my horror is over and everything turned out so well. To cure such a serious and terrible disease without surgery is really a miracle. When I returned to normal life, I purposely came back to my town and went to show the treatment result to my doctors, who hadn't believed it was possible. They only shrugged their shoulders. And just imagine, none of them even asked how I had achieved such results, even though all of them had been yelling in chorus that it was impossible. The knowledge is there. Implement it. It can help so many people. But no, their pointless pride won't allow it. I will be grateful to Igor Mikhailovich to the end of my days for everything he has done with his hands of gold. He has put so many people back on their feet. I've seen a lot while coming to visit him. People really come here with their last hope for recovery. Even those very doctors and professors bring their children and grandchildren here. When the chiropractor's name was mentioned, I gave a start. Can it really be? No way, it's impossible, I thought, puzzled. Everything inside of me strained and turned into a listening ear. Meanwhile, the cube buzzed in a new wave. "Yes, he's a man with a big soul," another woman said. People say that his great-grandfather was also a famous chiropractor in Orlovshchina. They say that he was a man with a gift from God and diagnosed disease unerringly. Our doctor is also very keen, as if he has X-ray vision. I had a slipped disc, and he said right away, 6 millimeters. Later, I underwent radiography, and sure enough, everything was confirmed. That's because his hands are especially sensitive. I read in a newspaper that he can find a child's hair, akin to a human nerve, hidden under 40 sheets of paper. Journalists conducted this kind of experiment. He said it's the same as finding the exact place of a strangulated nerve and releasing it by hand manipulations. Thank God there is such a man. I'm grateful that he brought us to him. The old woman, who was talking about her granddaughter Anna, crossed herself. You know, last year I had osteochondrosis that he treated, a white-haired old woman said. This year I lifted a heavy object and messed up my back again. It was so painful that I couldn't sleep for 2 nights. I had gnawing pain, and once I either fainted because of it or completely ran out of strength, but I passed out that evening. And then our chiropractor came to me in a dream, stroked me on the head and said, "Don't be afraid. Now you'll feel better, and tomorrow come to me. Everything will be all right." So, can you imagine? I got up in the morning completely different. Even the pain let go a bit. Today, this is my 3rd session, and I feel totally revived. While before I was just at a loss. But what's strange is that in the dream he had hair down to his shoulders, like an angel has, and his eyes were so kind. Right, he has unusual hair. Such a blonde color is very rare. What would we do without him? Really, God has sent us an angel. After these words, a very decrepit old woman who, up to that moment, had been dozing on the edge of the bench, unexpectedly squeaked, "Not an angel, but an archangel." She again submerged into slumber. Her words surprised the whole crowd. Then a man who was a miner, judging by the black rim around his eyes, said, "I don't know what kind of an angel or archangel he is, but he's a great man. He put me back on my feet, although I don't believe in God." "I didn't believe either," remarked a sturdy old man. "I was a member of the Communist Party for 30 years, and now look." He pulled out a cross on a string and showed it to the crowd. "I wear this cross. All my beliefs changed after an incident. I will never forget it. I work at a factory, near a blast furnace. That memorable day, I had to go on a work shift. And the night before, I had seen our Igor Mikhailovich in a dream, where he said, 'Tomorrow come to visit me, don't go to work, if you go there you won't come back.' Well, before that, I was receiving treatment from him, but just then I was taking a break from my treatment. I woke up in the morning and my back was hurting. Well, I thought, it probably ached at night, that's why I saw him in my dream. I was ready to go to work, but then I thought, why should I go? I'll have to lift heavy things. How can I do that? My back will collapse. So I decided to go to the chiropractor and got a sick leave. Can you imagine? That day there was an explosion in the chamber, and almost my entire crew perished. If I had been there, well, I actually stand right next to the blast furnace, so I would have died too. How can a mere mortal understand all this? I wanted to tell Igor Mikhailovich about it, but he put his finger to his lips, silencing me. And that's all. How can I not believe in God after that? "Oh, you know, a similar incident happened to our neighbor," said a woman of about 30 years old, joining the conversation. "By the way, he is the one who gave me the chiropractor's address. He was receiving treatment from him at one time. And last year, our neighbor got into trouble. Those of you who are locals, remember that explosion at the mine? He was trapped under the rubble. Here's his story. I was lying alone in the darkness, covered with rock. I was terribly afraid of being buried alive. I had already bid farewell to life, to all my near and dear people. Suddenly I saw the figure of our chiropractor before my eyes, appearing as if from the fog. And he said so calmly in his melodious voice, 'Don't be afraid, it's too early for you to die. I'll stay with you here until you are saved.' When the man regained consciousness, rescuers were already pulling him out. He was the only one who survived out of their entire crew. After that incident, the man completely changed. He stopped drinking alcohol and came to believe in God. His wife and kids can't stop rejoicing. He became a really great guy. Meanwhile, the queue ahead of us began to move. And in front of a parted crowd, I saw a man wearing a white smock. I was so surprised that my bag almost slipped out of my hands. "Sensei," I whispered quietly, but the next moment I yelled at the top of my voice, Oops, Igor Mikhailovich." Sensei turned around and upon seeing me, gave me a sign to approach. I barely squeezed through the crowd. My heart was beating fast in my chest. He greeted me and asked, "Why are you here? Did something happen?" "Well, my mother has problems with her back." We moved off to a corner where Igor Mikhailovich lit a cigarette. My father's general gave us this address. I gave away all the state secrets in a single breath. He even gave us his Volga. Sensei glanced in the direction where the cars were parked. "Ah, Alexander Vasilyevich, how's he doing?" "Well, as he told my dad, he has had no problems with motion for 2 years." "Good. And what happened to your mother?" I started telling everything I knew in detail, gesticulating vigorously with my hands in excitement. Having listened to me, Sensei said, "All right, bring your mom and follow me." Overjoyed, I ran to my mom and said that Igor Mikhailovich would receive us out of turn. My mother was happy, of course, but also extremely surprised. She got up with difficulty. And we went to the returning chiropractor. "This is my sensei, Igor Mikhailovich." I introduced him to my mother with indescribable pride. We walked into the depth of the house filled with waiting people. In the waiting room, there stood a trestle bed, and in the corner, there was a small icon with a burning lamp. I helped my mother to undress to her waist and lie down on the trestle bed. Walking out of the room, I saw Igor Mikhailovich bending over Mom's back and palpating her spine with his hands. Already behind the curtain in the adjacent room, I heard Sensei's voice. "Yes, it's true. You have a serious problem here. A dorsolateral prolapse up to 7 millimeters in segment L4-L5 that is causing stenosis of the intervertebral foramen. As a consequence, there is a compression of the spinal root." "Can you explain it simply?" To put it simply, it's a disc herniation. As a result of the disc destruction, sequestra, meaning small pieces of this disc, dropped into the spinal canal towards the spinal foramen and are pushing on the spinal root. That's what is causing you pain. This is certainly a serious problem, but it's curable. Behind the thick curtain, I heard a light cracking of vertebrae and some unusual sounding pops. In a few minutes, Sensei called me to help my mother get dressed. Having scheduled the next visit, we said our goodbyes and slowly walked towards the car. "How do you feel?" I asked my mother. "It's bearable," she replied. I couldn't calm down the whole drive home, thinking about Sensei. I had guessed him to be anyone: physicist, chemist, philosopher, historian, orientalist scholar, physiologist. But a simple chiropractor, that was too much. Well, even if he wasn't simple but quite a famous one. And still, with his incredible pool of knowledge, with his phenomenal abilities, and finally, with such unusually pure human morals, he could have become a prominent scientist, politician, or whoever, moving up in the ranks of society based on his level of knowledge. What is he wasting his potential on? If it weren't for the fact of him helping my mom, my brain would have continued being outraged for quite a long time. Driving out of this God-forsaken place along back roads, we passed a dilapidated half-ruined church, probably built before the revolution of 1917. My thoughts switched to thinking about the eternal, about God, about faith, and about the great people. And suddenly it dawned on me. Sensei really helps people. With his hands, he cures thousands of bodies tormented by pain and thousands of souls seized by sorrow, restoring people's health, faith, and joy of life. Gosh, that's what all the great people did. After all, each of them went to people with an open heart and performed good deeds. Sensei also mentioned this once. Can it be that he... Wow. I feverishly began to recall all the moments supporting my guesses. After returning home, I reread everything in my diary concerning Sensei's personality. Yes, the fact that he's a chiropractor added the main missing link to my logical chain and proving it to my own mind. The main thing is that he cures the bodies and souls of various people, hence, communicating with such a huge number of individuals, each of them having their specific destiny, problems, and pains. He knows people's moods, their attitude to life, and their spiritual level of development better than any politicians do. In fact, it's impossible to imagine a better profession for the earthly life of a bodhisattva. Such a discovery caused a wave of goosebumps on my skin, and some shimmering spiral waves evoked a tingling sensation in my solar plexus. But as soon as my agitated thoughts began to calm down, my common sense hurried to take up the vacant space. On the other hand, I thought, why have I exalted him so much? Maybe all this is merely my imagination. I got tired, worried too much, heard various conversations in the queue, and then I made hasty, fantastical conclusions. Okay, he helps people. He has a talent and abilities for that. So what? He's just a good professional, as that woman in the queue said. And that's all. By appearance, he's an ordinary man with a common face that looks like all other human faces. His appearance doesn't differ from others in any way. He's just like everybody else. At that moment, I noticed that the deeper I developed my common sense theory, the more something bad emerged in me. Some kind of anger and dark envy that Sensei possessed such talent and abilities while I didn't. My thoughts became so nasty that I even got scared of myself. Stop, stop, stop. Who is that, creating a storm in a teacup? Friends, it's not me. Can the soul really think so badly? No. It is kindness itself. So where is all this filth coming from? It's not my opinion. These are intrusive thoughts that impudently keep coming again and again, awakening anger and hatred in me. These are instincts of the animal nature. I became really angry with myself and thought, I'm fed up with them. How long will I be such a dumb, stubborn jerk? I'm just so sick of this. If I continue like this, my whole life will fly by in evil thoughts and vanity. Then another thought visited me. Maybe it's because of our blown-up egocentrism that we do not notice what wonderful chances destiny gives us. And for the soul, wandering through centuries in darkness, such a chance may even occur only once in millennia. Who knows what we don't see due to our envy and anger? Lord, why are we so blind? Why do we start really valuing something only when we lose it? Why do we praise the great ones only after their death? For example, Christ was crucified because of somebody's inflated megalomania and our herd-like egocentrism. He was such a great man and could have done much more good for the human souls. If he were alive, and if people opened their hearts at least a little bit, human civilization could have made such a leap in its evolution that we, their remote descendants, would have already long ago been living in a real, united, free society. Without borders and government, without violence and terror, in peace and harmony. But no, even during Jesus' lifetime, very few people really valued him, while the majority probably envied him, gloated and upbraided him with their animal vanity, boorishness, hatred, and indifference. Though after his death, everyone came to believe in him right away. Let's even take prominent personalities, our contemporaries. When are all of them recognized? Mainly after their death. It is only afterwards that people speak well about them, even those who did many nasty things to them during their lifetime. However, these people are probably glad in their private thoughts that they got rid of their rival. That's the despicable, beastly nature. When will we finally wake up? When will we think with our souls and not our bodies? After all, then the entire world will change and will become completely different. I just want to yell this to the whole world. But what's the point? Instead of yelling, I need to do something, change myself, and not let those parasites of consciousness anywhere near the field of my mind. Yes, if the majority of people understood this, all of us would perhaps learn to value and respect those geniuses whom nature sends to the world so rarely. As one great classical poet said, Mother Nature, had you not sent such people into the world, the field of life would have withered. Chapter 34. The next day, the whole ride together to the spiritual class, I was sharing with the guys my fascinating news that our sensei was a famous chiropractor. I told them what I had heard and seen while visiting him. For them, it was also a big surprise. Almost everyone had already gathered on our secret glade. Sensei greeted me and politely asked me how my mother was doing. Thank you, a little better. She still has strong pains, of course, but at least she slept peacefully last night. That's good, it's okay. We will restore her health gradually. I didn't have even a slight doubt about that, and for the most part, I was very happy that everything turned out exactly this way. I couldn't wish a better doctor for my beloved mother. Now my soul was at ease. You know, my persona continued, I was so surprised to see you there. I thought that only decrepit old men and women engage in chiropractic. Many people think this way. Why is that? Because in chiropractic, real knowledge and experience are acquired over many years. That's why people become professionals in this field closer to old age. I noticed that none of the senior guys, including Nikolai Andreevich, were surprised to hear the word chiropractic. They had probably known about this for a long time. Tell me, I continued, looking into Sensei's eyes with admiration, can spinal diseases be cured with the help of faith? Faith is capable of moving mountains, not just some vertebrae, but very few people have true faith. Why? Because doubts gnaw, and our animal nature suppresses. So it's very difficult for a human to gain true faith. Although when the soul prevails in the mind, it's very simple for it to do that. And if a person just blindly believes in his recovery or in the recovery of someone who is dear to him, will treatment work faster? Of course. And not just faster, but a lot easier and more efficient. I apologize. Nikolai Andreevich joined the conversation. I have long wanted to ask you, why did you choose this profession specifically? Well, how to put it, responded Sensei. Just like everyone, when I needed to choose a profession, I started thinking, I'm sure you'll agree with me, what can be better in the world than to restore people's health? And what can be more complex in a human body than the spine, perhaps except the brain? And what is the spine? Take a look at the structure of its nerve plexuses. It's a real tree of life that stretches with its crown to the brain and is connected via its roots with every organ of the human body. Figuratively speaking, this tree of life nourishes the entire body with health. If, God forbid, any kind of disorder occurs in it, this immediately affects the work of organs and the entire body as a whole. After all, more than 90% of all diseases appear as a result of spinal dysfunctions, from the most insignificant ones to those that are fatal. Almost everyone has problems with their spine during their lifetime. As of today, the spine remains the mystery of mysteries in science. Just like the brain, it is poorly explored. In general, yes, uttered Nikolai Andreevich. To be honest, I've never thought about this. But since the spine is such an important and complex organ in the body, one needs to possess a vast store of knowledge in order to treat it. That goes without saying. The spine is a very interesting and perfect biomechanical structure. Treating it is a great responsibility, because one needs to precisely diagnose a patient, to retrieve information, age, weight, and a whole range of various factors, and then to make the right decision and calculate the corresponding force and dose of impact. In fact, this is a sort of microsurgery, only without dissection. Moreover, it should be taken into account that revitalization takes place in the course of exploitation. Chiropractic is a very serious profession. One needs to know everything thoroughly. Biomechanics, anatomy, pathology, genesis, morphogenesis, physics, and the chemistry of cells. In a nutshell, one should perfectly know vertebrology. What? Ruslan asked. What is this brology? Not brology, but vertebrology, Sensei answered with a smile. It's a science of the spinal column, which includes all the sciences I've listed, plus specific knowledge about the spine. What kind of specific knowledge? Nikolai Andreevich inquired. One should also know the subtleties and techniques of various manual ways of treating vertebrogenic pathologies, osteopathy, chiropractic, and so forth. In other words, one should know the experience of previous generations in the field of bone setting, because it's a pretty ancient and interesting profession. Then, Sensei added as if incidentally, and of course, It implies communication with a large number of different people. I don't know about the others, but I understood perfectly well that Sensei's last words were the main reason why he had chosen his profession. I was absolutely 100% sure of that. Meanwhile, Sensei changed the subject of our conversation to meditations. We began to discuss our home results and then tried again to work intensively on ourselves, approaching with tiny steps our cherished goal, to become a human. Chapter 35. I noticed that days started flying by in a blink of an eye. I even had a feeling that I was noticeably short of time to get everything done. I even stopped going to a few hobby groups so that I could manage to do everything at least somewhat. Our classes and trainings continued to bring joy with their novelty and uniqueness. At one of the training sessions, Sensei began to explain a new subject. Today we'll have an introduction and, as usual, we'll partially learn the style of Taijiquan, which is considered to be a soft branch of Wushu. This style originated in one of the most famous monasteries of China, located in the Wudangshan Mountains. It is noteworthy that those local mountains used to be called the Mountains of Great Stillness. But once, a man, whose name was Zhen Wu, ascended to heaven in broad daylight after attaining Tao, which in Taoism is considered to be the inner divine power and a certain primordial substance that created everything in the universe. The mountains were named Wudangshan in his honor. According to one of the legends, a monk named Zhang Sanfeng lived in that monastery in the 12th century AD. Once he heard an odd sound in the yard and looked outside the window. The monk saw a magpie sitting on a tree and a snake on the ground, both looking at each other. Every time when the magpie flew off the tree to attack the snake would quickly turn its head and would curve in such a way that the magpie couldn't peck it. While observing them, Zhang had an insight. An opponent can be defeated by dodging his attacks. According to another legend, Zhen Wu himself gave Zhang Sanfeng this wise hint in a dream. As the proverb says, the saint said, and the wise man comprehended. Having grasped the main principle of this martial art, after many years of training, Zhang Sanfeng developed a soft fighting style that received the name Supreme Ultimate Fist or Boxing, Taijiquan. If we translate it literally, Tai means supreme, Qi means ultimate, and Chuan means fist. Based on one more version, the development of this style is also ascribed to a different Zhang Sanfeng from Wudang, who lived in the 14th century AD and was a disciple of the famous master Huolong, the fire dragon. Of course, there are also other fabled versions of the origin of this style. But in any case, the main principle of Taijiquan hasn't changed and consists in the following. Statics begets dynamics. The pliable overcomes the rigid. The slow defeats the fast. The short defeats the long. In other words, for example, you respond to a sharp attacking movement of your opponent with soft pliancy, in this way absorbing his strike by letting it pass into emptiness. As a result, your opponent loses stability. Then a few grams are enough to overcome the force of a ton. Ancient writings by Taijiquan masters say the following about this style. Minor movements lead to big changes. The pliable overcomes the rigid. By borrowing power from your opponent, you use it. You attack suddenly and affect the points. Taijiquan is similar to a smooth dance. At the highest level of mastery in this style, there are no prescribed movements or sets of movements. Only the major principles are preserved. One's body moves as if on its own, performing an improvised peculiar dance in dynamic meditation. But in order to attain something greater, one should start with something small. That's why we will start with the simplest exercise, pushing hands. It is done in pairs. Here you need to take turns in softly pushing each other, by slightly touching your opponent with your hands. Beginners move along a specific trajectory, while more experienced fighters can move at will. This exercise develops reaction to the opponent's actions by foreseeing his intentions. That is, you feel where he wants to move and should try to trick him by breaking free from his sticky hands. If your opponent moves without precision, for instance, if he moves stiffly or loses stability, you can cast him to the ground with a slight push. Movements should be relaxed, but consciousness remains vigilant. In addition, I will show you a corresponding regimen of breathing. These and subsequent exercises can also be used as health-improving gymnastics. Taijiquan is especially helpful for medical purposes to people who are in a state of continuous nervous stress, because these smooth movements with steady speed align potentials in the cerebral cortex, protecting one's brain from overloads. Moreover, concentration of thought on movements distracts a person from everyday problems, restoring his nervous system. And of course, this particular kind of gymnastics trains all the joints and ligaments. It is beneficial for everyone. So when you come home, you can teach it to your moms and dads, grandmas and grandpas, so that they never get sick. I want to draw your special attention to the fact that ancient masters of Taijiquan gymnastics insisted that their disciples attain purification, calmness, absence of wrong actions, preservation of purity of their heart, and restraint in their desires. This way, not only can a person defeat his diseases, but can also destroy his ego, thus clearing a path to perfection of his spirit. They were absolutely sure that heaven sees the day, spirituality, love of a human and based on his day, rewards him. The wisdom of masters that has come down to us from the ancient past is just as relevant nowadays. Each of you can use this knowledge to the utmost, and not just for self-defense, but also for discovering your inner world and revealing the mysteries of nature and the universe. You should always remember that a human can achieve anything if his goal is clearly defined. Now let's proceed to the practical part. We lined up, and the teacher showed us breathing exercises for the sticky hands. Then Sensei made individual demonstrations of techniques, after which almost everyone landed on their butts within a few seconds to the laughter of their friends who found themselves in the same position a few minutes later. More advanced fighters, when performing the techniques incorrectly, flew 3 to 4 meters after an opponent's strike. The most interesting thing is that for the first 10 minutes everyone laughed at each other, but after 20 minutes we would already get up silently, groaning, and after another half an hour, we started working really seriously, completely focusing on the movement and accuracy of our performance. Nobody wanted to be seen as a clown, falling one time too many. The speedy guys, including Stas and Zhenya, worked especially beautifully. Evidently, they had been practicing this art for a long time as well. Their never-repeating improvisation was similar to a grandiose dance, full of unpredictable and at the same time rational movements. And if one of them made a mistake, he immediately flew far away, knocking down a bunch of people on his way. Finally, so as not to harm other people, these guys were moved to the end of the gym, almost next to the exit. But even there, Zhenya and Stas surpassed themselves. Working at sparring, Zhenya got distracted for 1 second by the opening door and immediately received a powerful blow from Stas, which not only threw him back to that ill-fated door, but also placed him on his knees next to the exit. At that moment, an imposing man of indeterminate age, with a stately face similar to that of Ramses, entered the gym. Some kind of fine Eastern aroma wafted from him. He was dressed in a stylish coat under which an expensive suit could be seen. Ramses looked at Zhenya in surprise, but the latter kept his wits, touched the floor with his forehead, and uttered ritualistically, "We sincerely greet you, O great Zhenwu, the most welcome guest of our tribe." He then quickly jumped to his feet, bowed to the gentleman one more time like a fighter, turned around and walked toward Stas, who could hardly suppress his laughter. Sensei smiled, approached the visitor and greeted him. "For how long did he practice this form of greeting?" asked Ramses in broken Russian with a strong accent. "Don't get mad at him. He is young and always mixing things up." Ramses became even more surprised and asked with a slight resentment in his voice, "Do I really look Chinese?" "Of course not, but—" Then Sensei said a phrase in an unusual language. Ramses laughed and added something in reply. Speaking in this melodious and very pleasant language, they went into the private office used by coaches. I noticed that the guest's gait was the same as Sensei's. As soon as the door shut behind them, Stas couldn't keep it in and laughed out loud, immediately receiving a punch from Zhenya in return. Falling with clatter onto the benches, he couldn't stand up for 5 whole minutes, rolling in a fit of laughter. Both of them would have kept laughing like that until the end of training, but the senior senpai, who was responsible for discipline in Sensei's absence, showed them his big fist, and the guys quickly hushed up and got back to work. I was bursting with curiosity to find out who that mysterious guest was, but my attempts to ask the senior guys were unsuccessful. They told me that they didn't interfere in Sensei's business. 30 minutes later, closer to the end of training, Ramses and Sensei came out of the office, confirming something with a smile along the way. They bid farewell as good old friends, warmly shaking each other's hands. After the departure of the mysterious guest, Sensei, with the same ease, switched back to Russian and started explaining the guy's mistakes he had seen, as if nothing had happened. His mood was clearly elevated. At home, just as always, I wrote down the most interesting things in my diary. The visit of this unusual foreigner raised many unanswered questions. I decided to leave the unraveling of this mystery to an indefinite later. As Sensei often said, there is nothing mysterious on earth that wouldn't be revealed someday. With such an optimistic forecast of the future, I continued my observation activities. Chapter 36. At spiritual classes, we were fine-tuning the previous meditations. Everything was as usual, except that Nikolai Andreevich had been absent for almost a week, which was uncommon for him. Finally, our psychotherapist showed up in perfect health and even an elated mood. He arrived before the beginning of the class when our cheerful group was standing at the glade along with Sensei, Zhenya, and Stas. Nikolai Andreevich's eyes were shining with extraordinary joy and delight. He quickly greeted everyone and then addressed Sensei and started telling him excitedly, "We finally finished the experiment. Everything has proved to be true. The results are simply astonishing. This technique of altering the state of consciousness that you gave me radically changes the picture of our world and all the concepts of our existence. But let me tell you everything step by step." Our guys looked in surprise at Nikolai Andreevich's unusually excited behavior. Sensei listened to him attentively while smoking a cigarette. I picked a more or less suitable candidate, in my opinion. We had a male patient, an inveterate alcoholic. He completed just 2 years of secondary education, at an institution at that. He grew up in orphanages after losing family in the war. Army, then a coal mine, and never-ending alcoholism. That's his entire life. But when I put him into an altered state of consciousness, he told us such things, moreover in some kind of an old Russian language, that all my colleagues who were present at the experiment were simply shocked by his answers. We recorded everything and brought the record to a professor who's a historian and a prominent expert in this field. The outcome surpassed all our expectations. Even the professor was surprised. It turns out that this alcoholic spoke the language of the Drevlian people who were an ancient East Slavic tribe, as the professor told us. Our patient shared amazing details and subtleties of everyday life in the 7th century, many of which not only coincided with the data obtained from archaeological excavations, but were not even known to science. He also mentioned a geographic area where he supposedly lived and the Sluch River. At the end, he told us about some big conflict with a man from Dregovici tribe. All of this coincides with the available data with remarkable accuracy. You can't even imagine what a great scientific breakthrough this is. Yet, it is necessary to confirm the data a few more times for the validity of the experiment. We need to substantiate it scientifically. I have chosen one more candidate. Wait. We agreed that I would give you the technique. You would try it, and that's all, Sensei said firmly. Please try to understand me. This is so valuable for world science. I understand everything, Sensei said calmly. However, we didn't talk about world science, just about you. You wanted a confirmation, and now you have it. As for world science, it's not the right time yet. Nikolai Andreevich fell silent, and, settling down a little bit, said, "It's a pity, but the experiment really was astounding. I was such a zealous atheist, but after it actually proves. Not even that. it changes everything completely. That's good. The main thing is that you understood it. Understood? You're putting it too mildly. It's a complete revolution in my consciousness. It's a grandiose revolution of the mind. Not only have I become convinced of the veracity of your words, but I've also come to believe in you so much that I'm ready to give my soul for you. Sensei smiled and said thoughtfully, I've already heard this before. Oh yes, exactly. Peter said the same thing to Jesus before he renounced him 3 times. Nikolai Andreevich began to strenuously convince Sensei of the opposite with the help of his solid arguments. Sensei just smiled silently and then changed the topic of conversation to meditations. Chapter 37. Spiritual classes were gradually becoming more and more important for me in this life. So simple and accessible at the same time, they gradually changed my view of the world. Some new feelings emerged inside of me. I began to perceive everything in a different way, as if I had discovered the other side of reality. Even nature, the very air that I had never noticed before, turned into a special material habitat, which I felt as light pressure from all sides, whatever I was doing. This feeling was somewhat similar to a sensation of water elasticity when you dive into it. But in the case of air, everything was much lighter. Nature around me became brighter, and colors turned richer as if an invisible dust veil had been removed from my eyes. Outside, spring was in full swing, animating the gray space of cities with its fresh, light green scenery. The world of nature existed according to its own cycle, as if wishing to demonstrate its greatness and independence from the petty creatures inhabiting it. This living creature had its own secret of life and death, which was carefully guarded during its long existence. The time spent in communication with Sensei flew by so quickly that I hadn't even noticed when I had to start preparing for final exams at school. To tell the truth, I didn't want to spend my precious time on them even though I realized that exams and subsequent studies were no trifles. They were necessary. As Sensei said, a human should continuously develop his intellect and broaden his outlook, meaning he should expand his knowledge everywhere and in every way possible, and should strive to explore sciences. Because it is through knowledge, namely the knowledge of himself and the world around him, that a human comes to God maturely. During spiritual classes and martial art training, Sensei kept surprising us with his personal example, with the breadth and depth of his knowledge. At general training sessions, he mostly taught us what our brain perceived easily without any resistance, as they say. Those were strikes, techniques from various styles, and health-improving exercises, which he described in his narrations from diverse points of view: medical, strategic, and philosophical. As for his mystical demonstrations, we had the good fortune to see them at the additional training sessions, when most people would leave. But once, there was an incident. At one of the training sessions, when most people were practicing strikes in pairs, Sensei was standing right next to us, showing Andre a complicated strike with a leg trip. I should note that on that day, the teacher was somewhat pensive and absorbed in his thoughts. Suddenly he stopped in his tracks and turned abruptly, peering worriedly at the opposite side of the gym. Volodya and Victor were sparring there, but their sparring became strange. Volodya was conducting an aggressive and brutal attack, using his arms and legs quickly to deftly assault his sparring partner. At the same time, Victor seemed to be somewhat confused and hardly had time to fend off Volodya's strikes, missing them more and more often. Sensei immediately clapped his hands sharply and shouted, "Yame!" which means, "Stop!" However, Volodya was obviously carried away by the excitement of sparring and didn't hear him, although the rest of the crowd turned to Sensei at this exclamation. And then something extraordinary happened. Swinging his hand abruptly, Sensei made a movement in the air, simulating a blow. At that very moment, Volodya flew aside with such force and along such a trajectory as if Sensei was standing next to him instead of near us. What we had seen made us catch our breath. Silence fell in the gym. I should say, the teacher had intervened just in time, because had Volodya hit Victor so precisely one more time, the latter would have been in trouble. Writhing in pain, Poor Victor tried to restore his breathing by a special technique used after dangerous strikes, which Sensei had once taught us at additional training. Meanwhile, Volodya, having flown about 5 meters head over heels, also tried to come to his senses after the unexpected flight, strenuously rubbing the spot where Sensei's blow would have struck if Sensei had been standing next to him. Everything happened in a split second in the presence of the entire group. Although I saw it with my own eyes, I couldn't believe it. My mind was simply overwhelmed despite the fact it had been more or less used to such surprises from Sensei. Literally minutes after the incident occurred, the crowd exploded with intense emotions. Andrei pulled Zhenya by the sleeve without taking his eyes off Volodya. "Hey, what was that?" Zhenya seemed to be in shock too. "Wait, child, for my spirit is also trembling in me from the miraculous vision." In the meantime, the teacher's face changed as if he was annoyed with himself for this blunder. He came up to Volodya and made a number of hand movements over his body, at the same time scolding him, obviously indignant at the attack. Volodya answered something, shrugging his shoulders and hiding his eyes shamefully, while the crowd rejoiced, impressed by what they had seen. Guys bombarded Sensei with questions which he seemed reluctant to answer. "What kind of a blow was that?" the guys were inquiring eagerly. "Well, how can I put it?" the teacher said with a sigh. "It is connected with human psychic energy. There's nothing here that is noteworthy. It is only one of the stages of spiritual development in martial arts. So we can learn it, can't we?" "You surely can if you're patient enough." Sensei quickly continued the interrupted training, so as to hush up this incident as fast as possible, as it seemed to me. At the end of the training session, the majority of people present had elevated levels of adrenaline in their blood and corresponding optimistic forecasts regarding their future. Unlike the others, our group silently observed the overall commotion because we were sure that Sensei wouldn't be able to avoid our direct questions at the additional training. Before the additional training, the teacher's mood improved a little, which was actually a good sign. Senior guys hastened to take advantage of that. During the additional training session, they simply tortured Sensei with questions in their desire to behold something else like that with their own eyes. At first, Sensei laughed the matter off, but then under their pressure, he agreed to show us the so-called protective screen. He told us first to find some items for ourselves. We ran to the sports equipment room and armed ourselves with what we could find there. The guys grabbed poles and basketballs. Andrei even took his nunchaku. I thought long and hard about what to choose and finally decided to take a tennis ball since I thought that if Sensei would fail, and the object did hit him, it wouldn't hurt him that much. Although Sensei had never made any mistake in his actions before, which inspired particular respect for his abilities. Once we had armed ourselves, Sensei took a stance 7 or 8 meters away from us. Concentrating, he raised his arms forward and spread them apart slightly. We took turns in throwing various objects at him as hard as we could. It was amazing, but no matter how hard we tried, all items simply flew by Sensei, changing their flight trajectory literally a meter away from his palms. Victor, Stas, and Volodya decided to go around Sensei from the other side and challenge him by throwing their items at him from behind. However, Sensei didn't even change his position, but only spread his arms wider. In short, no matter how we experimented, none of the items could reach Sensei. I didn't understand whether all of us became cross-eyed at the same time or if there really was a powerful invisible wall around him. My mind resisted the last argument in particular and was indignant in trying to prove that it was impossible. This very conclusion forced me to try throwing the tennis ball into the invisible wall again and again, now without any mercy, so as to reassure myself for a second that some kind of an obstacle really existed there. I think all other guys also had similar feelings because their excitement gradually changed to confusion. In my eyes, Sensei again began to transform from an ordinary man into a supernatural being, and my mind really started going crazy from all this improbable plausibility. Meanwhile, Sensei removed the screen and began to explain the principle of its operation, thus bringing the logical work of our consciousness to a normal and natural rhythm. Suddenly, I noticed that while I was listening to Sensei, Some signs of envy, that is, of the animal essence, began to arise in me again. First, it happened as if accidentally, but then they got stronger and stronger. Then, some doubts began to emerge in my mind, although Sensei was explaining everything in a simple and understandable way, based on what we had just seen with our own eyes. Finally, I caught myself thinking that while listening to Sensei's speech about spiritual capabilities, I was thinking dirty thoughts with the inflated mania of my own egocentrism. Wow, I thought. With such an underlying egoism, all the valuable knowledge will pass right by my ears. My mind will choose only those of Sensei's words that the animal nature wants, not the spiritual one. Hence, I will never succeed in anything this way. So I need to concentrate on something good. I need this knowledge only for good purposes, for exploring my essence. I don't want to use it to cause any harm. Let all people live in peace and love. I do not wish anyone evil and do not envy them. All of them are good and worthy of their lives. The main thing for me is perfection of my soul. Attuning myself this way, I began to listen to Sensei more attentively. Meanwhile, the conversation had already switched to strikes at a distance. This strike is very powerful, Sensei said. Human psychic powers are involved in it. How does the strike itself take place at such a distance? Stas asked. Basically, distance is an illusion. So in your understanding, it is sort of a projection of a strike. But in fact, there is a somewhat different type of physics. That is, space and time are compressed. Therefore, a person who delivers such a strike, as well as the one who actually receives it, feels direct physical contact. Does this knowledge come from Balian Jiao? Asked Victor. Yes. It's a special technique of the lotus from the art of the Punishing Sword of Shambhala. People of Shambhala have known and still know this art. A very long time ago, masters of the lotus came out into the world quite frequently. Not only did they master the old Lama style to perfection, but also the art of the punishing sword. Such a master could overcome a whole army on his own. To this day, in the East, there are legends about warriors who appeared from nowhere and departed to nowhere. But in the places where they stayed, they enjoyed great honor and respect among the local population because peaceful inhabitants couldn't find better protection. Those masters possessed an energy power which is much more serious than any modern weapon. For people who don't have knowledge of this art, to receive such a destroying blow from nowhere is more than awful. With time, the need for such masters to come into the world disappeared. This certainly doesn't mean that the art of the punishing sword vanished. In the antechamber of Shambhala, there is a specially trained person who carries out decisions of the Council of Bodhisattvas. If you remember, I once told you that Shambhala would never allow anyone to seize the whole world, or to use spiritual knowledge to harm humankind. So this master implements such decisions without leaving his cell. For that, it is enough for him to be in a special state of consciousness and to swing the lotus petal, a special ritual sword somewhat similar to a short Turkish saber. By the way, it is because of the sword that the art was named the Punishing Sword of Shambhala. Evidence of this master's activity may occasionally be found in the modern world as well. Some cases of mysterious deaths still remain a mystery, and not only to pathologists. For example, during autopsy, it is discovered that one's heart has been cut precisely into halves, as if with a sharp tool, while the skin and nearby organs remain intact. Or there were inexplicable cases where, in the presence of numerous guards, one's body was cut into pieces as though by a sword, while the clothes were undamaged. Thus, no matter how thoroughly a guilty person is protected by the newest technologies or even a whole army, he cannot evade the punishment. This is the primary reason why all tyrants fear Shambhala. That is why everyone has been searching and keeps searching for a contact with it, for they know that no matter how powerful and influential they are powerless before Shambhala. Sensei fell silent, but it seemed to me that his words still echoed in my ears. All the guys were pensive, perhaps because, just like me, they were astounded by everything they had heard. Nobody dared to break the silence, hoping that the teacher would add something else to this extraordinary information. Finally, Volodya lost his patience, and spoke in a bass tone. This master of the punishing sword probably has a power similar to atomic energy, if distance doesn't matter for his strikes. Compared to this power, atomic energy is merely a child's toy. Humankind is far from knowing its real abilities and real powers because of the prevalence of animal nature in it. Chapter 38. After such training and what we had heard and seen, our emotions raged for days. Thoughts of our abilities didn't give us a moment's peace. We wanted to achieve everything all at once. So, during the next few days, this optimistic mood showed itself in assiduous training of the body and mind. And when the time came for the next spiritual class, we simply showered Sensei with various questions. Observing all our excitement, the teacher said, "Guys, this strike at a distance, all the effects of Qi energy, and all the so-called miracles that I show you, are trifles not worthy of real attention. True power is in the soul. This is what needs to be developed and explored, and that's what should be admired. Divine love of the soul combined with the human mind. That's what a true miracle is. While everything that you saw is only side effects of different levels of spiritual development. It's all meaningless. You shouldn't focus on it." "But why is it meaningless?" Nikolai Andreevich said. "After all, miracles beget faith." "Yes, miracles beget faith, but let's look at what kind of faith. What happens to a person when he sees miracles? That is, those phenomena which are inexplicable for his brain. First of all, it greatly shakes up his psyche. His psyche simply becomes overwhelmed as it doesn't have information to explain a particular phenomenon. And since our brain possesses amazing mechanisms of self-preservation and self-defense, its compensatory functions, the protective factor of the brain, get immediately activated. Speaking the language of physiology, brain regions and groups of nerve cells cannot fully engage in mental activity. And then, something important happens. If the animal nature prevails in a person, he either begins to internally reject the fact of existence of such a phenomenon, blaming everything on the unreality of what is happening, or attributing it all to some kind of trickery, or a desire arises in him to learn all these things for the sake of his own mercenary interests and satisfaction of his megalomania. A person in whom the two natures are balanced starts thrashing in his thoughts from one extreme to another. I mean, today he blindly believes in all that, but tomorrow he starts doubting it. The day after tomorrow he begins to doubt his doubts again, and so on. In short, there is an active fight between the two natures on the field of his mind. Meanwhile, in a person in whom spiritual nature prevails, there arises, based on faith, a spirit of exploration of the given phenomenon, his own abilities and the secrets of nature, for the sake of the very process of cognition and perfection of his soul. His initial fear of the unknown phenomenon is muffled, and in the process of learning, it completely disappears and transforms blind faith into knowledge, that is, into true faith. In fact, guys, why do you think I show you all this? I do it in order to look at your thoughts, at the degree of the animal nature predominance in you, compared to the spiritual nature. And most importantly, why do I spend so much time explaining every phenomenon? It is to shake up your mind at least a little bit from its preoccupation with material existence, to force it to think about the eternal mysteries of nature, about your unexplored soul, and about God. After all, the more you come to know yourselves, the closer you'll be to God, to that eternal and unshakable which truly exists forever. What is your physical life on the scale of the universe? It's nothing. In comparison with universes and planets, a human practically doesn't exist. His life is an unreal reality, just an instant in God's thought. How is that? Zhenya didn't understand. Well, someday I'll explain this to you in more detail. Your bodies exist in a closed time cycle where you, meaning your souls, have all the conditions for their complete maturation. But you have to realize it by means of your mind, and it should merge with your soul in common aspirations. Then, your life will gain true meaning, because for God and for the cosmos in general, it is your mature soul that is valuable, and not those ashes of material bodies which it changes in the process of its development. So true, genuine faith arises out of knowledge, whereas knowledge comes through a word, through persuasion of your mind in the validity of an occurring phenomenon. As for miracles, by and large, they are merely a peculiar test of the internal level of development of an individual. This method of testing was used in their earthly practice by those who possessed real knowledge of Bailian Jiao science. Although we have quite a unique personality, Satya Sai Baba, who decided to turn people towards God by means of continuous demonstration of real miracles. Nikolai Andreevich pondered a little. It's a familiar name. Was it he who was shown on TV rubbing Gorbachev's head with his foot, blessing him? Yep, that's him, Sensei grinned. They called him an incarnation of God on Earth. An avatar. Avatara, Sensei corrected. But in fact, Avatara is translated from Sanskrit as descent or descension. Right, Avatara. They said that an avatar assumes a human image in order to raise the development of humanity a step higher, to bring it into a new era. Absolutely right. If you want to rescue a drowning man, you need to jump into water, that is, to become incarnated. As he likes to repeat. Who is he? Our group asked with curiosity. Well, Sai Baba is a great soul. Since human civilization is now at the threshold of global changes in reassessing its spiritual level of development and the events following that, Sai Baba decided to make his contribution to this process. He decided to amaze the world with his miracles. Sai Baba was preparing for this mission for a long time, developing his own theory of the influence of miracles on the spiritual development of a human. First, in the Upanishads, he predicted his 3 incarnations in the era of technology. And then, once the time came, he began to test this theory in practice. He first incarnated as Sai Baba in the village of Shirdi in India in 1872. All his life he worked miracles, read thoughts, could traverse space, take any material form, and so forth. He died in 1918, having announced before his death that he would come back to Earth again in 8 years in the south of India. And so it happened. In 1926, Satya Sai Baba was born in Puttaparthi, a small remote village in the south of India. In 1940, he was proclaimed an avatara, and he's been working miracles to this day. When the time comes for him to leave, he will reincarnate again as Prema Sai. He has already predicted not only the exact date and place of his next incarnation between the cities of Bangalore and Mysore, but also the names of his future parents. Is it true what they said on TV that he can levitate, appear in different places at the same time, and what is most interesting, he can materialize enormous quantities of anything, from a diamond to cookies? They say he just pulls them out of thin air. Or is this just another hoax? Nikolai Andreevich asked. No, it's really true. But that's unrealistic. It is absolutely realistic. But his main mistake is actually in demonstrating miracles, meaning things that are still a mystery for humanity. Those who have seen his miracles are surprised and start pondering, while those who haven't seen them laugh at him and consider him an illusionist. Unfortunately, the latter make up the majority. Yet, he certainly carries out his mission conscientiously, and God willing, he will help as many people as possible to at least wake up. Nevertheless, true enlightenment of the soul comes through word. So what, is he really God? Ruslan asked. You know, people ask him this question quite often, and the answer is rather simple and true. As Satya Sai Baba says, "You're God too. The only difference between you and me is that I know that I am God, while you don't."